Okay, so I promised that we would, I'd take a look at the force plate. So, and I did, and I fixed it, I think. So I need a volunteer. Okay, Ryan. You know what? Ryan volunteered last time. So Nolan, you come up here. Yeah. Hopefully that'll be correct. Okay, so this is what I need you to do, Nolan. Okay. I need everybody but Nolan to be quiet. This is what Nolan's going to do. He's going to stand on the force plate, okay, with and then he's going to bunny hop like this. Okay. So you're going to bunny hop back onto the force plate. Okay. Okay. So, yeah. So here we go. Oh, excellent. So I'm going to hit the record, and go ahead and do your bunny hop. Excellent. Do another one. Excellent. Okay.
Jump higher.
Jump higher. Okay. Well done. Thank you. Okay, this is excellent. All right. So I talked about this yesterday but the force plate wasn't working. Well, now it's working. So it's actually pretty convenient that that Nolan weighs a nice 800 newtons. So here's Nolan standing on the force plate, and then what's happening here?
He's loading up.
He's loading up. Yeah, he's going down. He's crouching a little bit. So as he goes down, he's basically removing a little bit of normal force from his gravity. So this is him going down. Whoop. And then what is this giant spike here? Yeah, this is him pushing off, basically squishing the molecules of the force plate. So he pushes off. And then what happens to this tippy top right here? He's in the air. And the force plate goes zoop. I'm not measuring anything. And then he hits. Boom. And these should be the same height like they are here. They should be the same height, but it depends on how we hit on our shoes, how squishy our shoes are. But I will tell you that the area of this curve equals the area of this curve. So the area of this triangle and this triangle are the same. But that's something for later. Force times time. We'll learn about force times time later. But anyway, so he's in the air, here he's hitting again, and then he's basically using his inertia to pull himself down, and then he stands up again, and we're at 800 meters, or 800 newtons. So the takeaway from this is, in order to jump, he has to squish the molecules of the floor, and then the molecules of the floor are going to push back, and in this case they pushed back with almost 2,000 newtons. That allowed Nolan to accelerate upward. Cool?
I want to know how much I weigh.
And just because I mentioned it, and for the two gentlemen in the back who are going to be definitely taking the physics AP test and are going to be helping you with the physics AP preparation in the spring, the area under a force time curve, is called impulse. It's a change in momentum. It's the delta P, or the delta M delta V, and this is actually what Newton was talking about. He was talking about changes in impulse, not actually forces, because that was actually easier to measure, the changes in impulse. But we'll come back to this concept. I just wanted to plant a seed. Yeah?
So is the exponential curve like putting force in the sudden drop is like in the air with no force?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So this is him. This triangle is him squishing the molecules, applying an impulse on the force plate, and this is him, the force plate, pushing back on that same impulse as he hits the ground, basically giving it back. So there you go. I thought that would be kind of fun. And yeah, and there's the line is just him standing there. Okay, back to work. I'll just close that.
Because when you jump harder,
actually, I don't want to close that. All right, so I have up here.
It's like the spring, you know, when you stretch a spring.
Before we get to.
That's what that happens.
Yeah.
Press up hard enough.
Before we get back to the presentation, I want to show you my little doodads up here. I've doodads. You're going to use these doodads a little bit later. All right. They're doodads. So let me bring up the Logger Pro again. There we go. All right, so what I have here, ladies and gentlemen, if I can have your attention. What I have here is 2 dynamics carts. These are the same dynamics carts you used when you were doing the ramp where you measured their velocity going down. And I have my really long aluminum dynamics track, but I'm not going to use a lot of the space. Now on these dynamics tracks, I have secured 2 force probes. So this is a force probe. If you can see, I'm going to push on the force probe. You can see what happens. I'm going to pull on the force probe. You can see what happens. Okay. This is me pushing on it, pulling on it. Okay. Look at the red number. So if I squish the force probe, this is what happens. If I pull on the force probe, this is what happens.
So it's always good to push off.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zero the force probes. 0, 0. All right. Now the 2 force probes have hooks on them. And I'm going to need someone to press the space bar for me. Excellent. Okay, so if I come up, press the space bar. Basically, just so we can collect the data. Just don't trip over the cable. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to push these 2 carts together. And they have a little hook. And that little hook, basically one hook's against the other hook. You can, here, let me show you this. See this? For those who can't see in the back. So the force probes have these crazy little hooks. And I'm going to push them together. And what I'd like you to do for the next 5 seconds is, this one's red. So on your left is the red one. So this one's red, this one's blue. If I push them together, is the red one going to show a higher force, the same force, or less force than the blue one? Take 5 seconds and ask your neighbor. Okay, so if you believe the red force is going to show more force, or red force probe is going to show more force, raise your hand. Nobody. If you believe the red force is going to show the same force, raise your hand. Almost everybody. And those who didn't raise their hand think the red force is going to show less force? I think that's what you're saying. Okay, so go ahead and hit the space bar, please. And you'll let that graph. And I'm going to push the 2 of them together. Push. Push the 2 of them together. Do they show the same force? When they... Yeah, pretty much the same force. That's cool. Okay, yeah. So why'd they show the same force?
Equal and opposite reaction.
Equal and opposite forces. So for every reaction, there's an opposite and equal reaction. So that makes sense, right? When I was pushing on both of them. Now I'm going to do something kind of interesting. I'm going to hold this one flat. I'm going to hold the blue flat against the cart, and I'm going to push the red into the blue. Okay? Is anything going to change? Okay, go ahead, space bar again. Is anything changing? Well, still the same. Even though it is the blue one I'm pushing, and I said the red one I'm pushing, and the blue one is holding down. Still the same. Okay. Now, I'm going to drag the blue one away from the red one. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to hold on to the blue. I'm not going to touch the red at all. I'm going to drag the blue away from the red. I'm going to lock their hooks together, and I'm going to drag the blue away from the red. Will the red show less force, more force, or the same force? I'm just going to be moving the blue. I'm going to let the red just be dragged along, like the caboose of a train. So take 10 seconds to ask your neighbor.
Same. Pulling card.
Okay. Some of you have friends and some of you have phones. If you're on your phone, hopefully you're actually researching this. Burn. Okay, so if you believe that the red car is going to show less force, raise your hand. Handful of you. Okay. If you believe the red car is going to show more force, raise your hand. Small hand, smaller handful. And if you believe the two are going to be the same again, raise your hand. A bigger handful. All right. Sylvie, if you could please. What if I pull the other one? I pull the other way. What if I pull this one? What if I pull this one? And if I pull this one? Wow. So, why are they the same?
The pulling car has to exert as much force as the car that's being pulled exerts drag.
What would have to happen if the force of one was larger than the force of the other? Remember what forces create. We talked about this yesterday. What do forces create? Acceleration. So if they have the same acceleration, don't they have to have the same force? Yeah, and the only way that one could have more or less force is if one accelerated at a different rate. But as long as the two are connected and accelerating at the same rate, they have to have the same force. Does this make sense? Yes. Hey, back row. Back row. Yes. Does this make sense? Yes. Because the question you guys asked me a couple weeks ago, that's actually what made me think about doing this. I'm like, I could show that. So yeah, as long as the two objects are accelerating together, it doesn't matter what direction they're going, doesn't matter which one's doing the pushing or the pulling, they have to have the same force. Okay, does that make sense? Now what if I put a rubber band between them? Ooh, rubber band. Okay. Now I'm going to put a rubber band and raise your hand. Actually, give me a thumbs up if you think something's going to change. All right. All right. So go ahead and Sylvie, go ahead and hit the button. Whee! 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 Did anything change? Whoa.
Something changed.
Yeah, something. Mr. Breyer derailed the things. But did anything change?
The red one would actually got more.
That's where it fell over, yeah. So because you noticed, one of them accelerated differently. One of them now had a vector, an acceleration vector that was no longer perpendicular. Okay, anyway, so yeah, nothing changed, even though there was a rubber band between them.
Wait, okay, I have a question.
Yeah, because the rubber band took care of the space between the things.
If
Yeah.
your rubber band was bigger though, would it change it?
As long as rubber band was tight the whole time.
Yeah, that's what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, it's the slackness. I made sure to get rid of the slackness ahead of time. This is where the slackness popped up.
Yeah. That's why.
Okay. Here's a slack is when it's like whoop, droopy. Okay. And a spring. Will a spring change anything? Go ahead and hit it again.
Yes.
Oh, it will if I run over the cable. Okay. And this is where things fall apart because. Try it again. Yeah. And the spring is like it's flexing and unflexing and flexing and unflexing, and it doesn't even matter. It's still, as long as the two things are moving together, the forces are the same. Even though the spring was like stretching and unstretching and stretching and unstretching as I went, it's still the same.
Because when the car is stretching,
That's a good point of view.
What was the question? It doesn't. It's not actually compressing. It's just not pulling as much. So that's where this is like stretching, unstretching, stretching, stretching, unstretching. But the forces on both of them, on both sides of the spring, are the same. Okay. So that was a really good question. You might not have heard it because you were chatting in the back. So he said, well, what happens when the spring is being compressed and then compressed and extended? Well, when it's being extended, the force is larger, and when it's being compressed, the force is less. Okay? But the force on either side of the spring is still the same. The force on either dual range force sensors is still the same. Okay? Make sense?
how do you go negative? Yeah, I understand why
They bashed into each other. They went squish. This is the point at which I stopped one because the cord got hung up and they squished into each other. Okay, questions? All right. Are we good? Anything else you want to see while I have it all set up?
Is there any scenario you can create that would be different?
If the really slack rubber band. So if one accelerates away before this one can accelerate, then that would happen.
So for like in a more real life situation where there's more friction and you have to like overcome and there's like that space, that's when it would be all different?
No. Let's create that scenario. So let's get some tape and create lots of friction and see if that changes anything. More likely than not, I'm going to derail the cars. But let's see what happens if we do add some friction.
So you're saying
So we're gonna give this car a whole bunch more friction than the other car by putting some tape on the track. Do me a favor, on your dynamics tracks, don't put tape on your dynamics tracks on the grooves because they're get all gooey. Okay, so now this one, oh yeah, this one's got lots of friction. Let's see. You want to try the rubber band, or you want to put them together?
What if one has friction?
Yeah. Okay, so one is going to have friction, the other isn't going to have. Go ahead and hit it.
When the friction initially does it.
Yeah, I think it's still pretty much the same. Even though this one is definitely encountering friction, it's still dragging this one. No. No. You want to see it happen? Okay. So let's see if I can find a really big rubber band that flexes a little bit first. Yes? Of course. Oh. You are doing great, Sylvie. All right, so now we got a big rubber band, and I'm going to have them squished together first. I'm not going to. It's going to take some time for them to catch up, I guess, and see what happens. All right, go ahead. It still didn't. Yeah. But I guess you had a really, really slack rubber band. Eventually, it would. No, it actually wouldn't. No, because if it had a really slack rubber band, as this one pulls away, there's nothing to pull on the force meter. So that's why this is where the rubber band was slack. Am I boring you? So I can move on. Okay, so this is where the rubber band was slack, and then once it's stretched, then we had the spike. Because when the rubber band was slack, there was nothing for this thing to pull up against. So there you go. Newton's third law. Okay, anything else you want to see before we move on? What if I what? Oh, two-dimensional vectors with Newton's third law? That's way beyond the scope of this course. Okay, thank you very much.
Since the one is still pulling the other,
It's not pulling the other though, it's coasting.
All right, lights on or lights off? Lights off, okay.
Oh, nice.
All right, so we left off yesterday talking about Newton's third law, which is why we had all this gear up. And we talked about for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction, which gives us force pairs. And we talked about that movie. Some of you haven't even. This was like the movie of my generation, The Matrix. Like, whoa, cool, The Matrix. It is rated R. Because it is amazing, and it was written by the Wachowski brothers, who are now the Wachowski sisters.
no way. That's so gay. I hate it.
Anyway, so there you go. So that's Newton's third law. Now a force pair, I mentioned it as a lot of you were cleaning up yesterday. A force pair is a mirror image statement. So hand slaps face, face slaps hand. Okay? Ball applies force on bat, bat applies force on ball. Butt applies force on chair, chair applies force on butt. Okay? So they are mirror statements of each other. Now we're going to do something that you actually saw yesterday. And this is called a free body or a force diagram. In a free body or a force diagram, you draw all of the vector forces on an object at any given time. Okay, so here we go. We got a car. It's my disco car. There's a downward force. There's an upward force. There's a forward force, and there's a backward force.
What the forward force?
Okay, so this is a free body diagram. In a free body diagram, you arbitrarily pick a point on the object. The AP will actually give you a dot. They will say, let this dot represent a crate, or let this dot represent a skateboard. So they're going to give you a dot, and you're going to draw all your vectors anchored to that dot. So I've just arbitrarily made the driver's side door my anchor, and then I have some vectors. What is this downward vector?
Gravity.
More specifically, it is weight. Weight. So weight, FG. Normal force up Force applied, we like to call it thrust sometimes, but I still like to call it force applied. And then friction force back. Okay? So this is your typical free body diagram. All forces acting on a car. You got friction force from air, from things in the mechanism, in the engine, on the tires, just whatever, friction force pulling back, force applied pushing forward, weight pushing down, and normal force pushing up.
Oh, this is like
Yep. Yeah, free body diagrams are everywhere. I will caution you though, sometimes you see old style free body diagrams where the forces are not anchored to a point. You need to anchor your forces to a point, because that is the way the AP has told us to teach. Anchor your forces to a point.
Is this car not?
Well, what do you think? So that's the next question. Is this car accelerating? Yes. So there's your thrust, and there's your friction. So yeah, it is. It is accelerating forward a little bit. Okay, what is the normal force if the weight is 10,000 newtons? 10,000 newtons. Only very few cars can launch themselves off the ground, unless they're a Knight Rider. So most of the time, the normal force equals the weight. Hey, if the normal force was 10,000 newtons, which is a pretty reasonable weight for a car, 1,000 kilograms is about 2,200 pounds, so that's like a 2003 Honda Civic. Yeah, maybe that's the weight of like a Nissan Leaf. About 2,000 pounds, I don't know. But anyway, if the weight of the car was 10,000 newtons, and then you all pile in, and the weight is now 12,000 newtons, what's the normal force? 12,000 newtons. Assuming that the concrete under the car doesn't crush, it's still 12,000 newtons. And when an eagle lands on the top of the car, and the weight is now 12,010 newtons, what's the normal force? 12,010 newtons. Good. Again, because we talked about, unless that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, exactly. So we talked about normal force. Normal force has an upper limit, but it adjusts to whatever it's resisting. What is the net force if the thrust is 1,000 newtons and the friction is 500 newtons? 500 newtons forward, right. So 500 newtons in the direction of force applied. So the vertical forces cancel out. There is no net force in the vertical direction. The horizontal force applied to the right is 1,000 newtons, and the horizontal force to the left is 500 newtons, so there is a net force of 500 newtons in the direction of force applied. Can you see this, Nolan? Okay. Question?
Okay, like you know how you're driving a car and then you like hit a crack or a bump. That like shifts the force, like the normal force, and does that shift anything like this?
It applies an additional force from that bump. So yeah, because your car accelerates up a little bit when you hit your bump. So basically what it's doing is it's creating an additional friction force in an upward direction. So the bump would have a direction, the bump would look like that, right?
Yeah.
Which would have a force normal in that direction, which would have both a component backwards and a component upwards. So that additional component upwards would lead to an additional normal force, and that is why your car goes up a little bit.
What if you hit a crack?
Same thing. Yeah, if you hit a pothole, then if you hit a pothole, nothing's under the car. So at that instant, your normal force just goes away, which is why you accelerate into the pothole.
So does that change like the whole thing with one if you like one?
Not in this class. No, it doesn't change anything in this class because that would be way too complicated for at this level.
Like I can understand how there's like multiple like diagrams for one object. Like a car.
Don't wrap yourself in that kind of complexity, because when you go to work for Ford, they'll have computers to do that. But so just get the basics down and then we'll be good. All right, so before we leave this slide, what is the acceleration of this kilogram car? First of all, what is the kilograms?
Weight.
Well, the weight is 10,000 newtons, so what's the mass?
Oh, we said something. 1,000. Mass times 1,000. It's 100.
It's 1,000, yeah. So again, weight is mass times the acceleration due to gravity, weight times 10. So I weigh 1,000 newtons, so I have a mass of 100 kilograms. The car weighs 10,000 newtons, so it has a mass of did I say 1,000? 100 kilograms? So the car has 10,000 newtons of weight, so 1,000 kilograms of mass.
You would probably be able to fly if you put wings on it.
Absolutely. Anyway, good luck making thrust. But so what's the acceleration of the car? So lean over to your neighbor and take a minute or two and figure out what it is. What's the acceleration of the car?